I think we need to start making distinctions, start discriminating in the old sense of the word, which means having standards. And all groups of immigrants are not the same. For example, the UK has let in a large number of Ukrainians. They've given refuge to hundreds of thousands of Hong Kongers. Brilliant, right? They fit in, they work, they're well educated, they don't tend to be dependent on the state, they're culturally compatible. They're from the same larger civilizational background. And, the powers that be don't believe that we should be able to make these statements. I mean, that this is somehow racist, and we have to consider everyone to being the same. But it's very easy to research. We have a lot of numbers now, especially in Europe, on, if nothing else, which nationalities tend to depend on welfare when they immigrate. And, I can tell you, it's the Somalis, the Eritreans, Albanians. They also have unusually criminal. We've got the numbers. It's not hard to do. It's just we don't have the will.
Welcome back to the J100 podcast, brought to you by the Allgemeiner. A lot of our conversations live in the language of power. Institutions, ideology, war, media, and the forces shaping Jewish life in real time. But the deeper question underneath all of it is often simpler and harder. What happens to a society when it loses the ability to argue in good faith? When moral language becomes a weapon? When belonging becomes conditional? When people start sorting one another into saints and heretics instead of citizens? That's where today's episode begins. My guest is Lionel Shriver, one of the most distinctive and frankly one of the most stubbornly independent voices in contemporary literary culture. She's a celebrated novelist and a fierce cultural critic, known for refusing to speak in slogans and for refusing to join whichever consensus happens to be fashionable in the arts at the very moment. And whether you agree with her or not, and you may not, Shriver is almost impossible to listen to passively. She forces you to sharpen your own thinking. Lionel joins us from Portugal, where she lives now after decades in the UK. And her new novel, A Better Life, is out this week, an immigration novel shaped by a question most people only talk about in the headlines. What is a country allowed to demand of the people who enter it? And what is a society allowed to protect about itself without being told that protection is immoral? She brings to that question something rare, a blend of moral seriousness, lived experience as an immigrant herself, and a novelist's instinct for contradiction, because she's not only interested in the argument, she's interested in the human cost of it. We talk about how her skepticism toward modern ideological dogma goes all the way back to her childhood. Growing up in a liberal Presbyterian household, the daughter of a prominent religious leader who ultimately became president of Union Theological Seminary in New York. Lionel describes that environment not as oppressive, but as presumptuous, a place where belief was expected, not chosen. And she draws a straight line from that experience to what she sees today. A culture that could feel like it's enforcing a moral orthodoxy, often with punishment and often without mercy. We also talk about the arts, because Lionel isn't just commenting on politics from the outside. She's speaking from inside the cultural world, and she's unsparing about what she sees as a creative class that has become politically uniform. Writers who claim to prize imagination and complexity, but who on certain subjects suddenly demand total conformity. And she argues that the cost of that isn't only social, it's artistic. In her view, it produces worse art, because propaganda is not literature, and moral certainty is often the enemy of truth. Then we get to a topic that matters deeply to our audience, and that Lionel engages with in a way that's unusually direct: Israel. She talks about why she cares, why Israel isn't an abstraction to her. and why she thinks so much of the Western conversation about Israel is distorted before it even begins. She argues that many people don't understand something basic: how small Israel actually is, and how revealing it is that a country that tiny can attract such obsessive hostility. And she makes a broader claim that I think is worth sitting with, even if you disagree: that Israel represents something the West is struggling to defend right now: national self belief, a sense that a people can love its own story, protect itself, and remain proud without being told that pride is a moral failure. We also talk about the slippery relationship between commentary and fiction, because Lionel has a sharp distinction here. A columnist, she says, is allowed to lean into bias. A novelist can't. A novel that exists only to win is usually a bad novel. And so she explains how fiction forces you to write the other side intelligently, to complicate your own thesis, to build characters who undermine the purity of an argument because real life undermines it. It's one of the most interesting parts of the conversation, especially now, when so many people treat storytelling as just another form of persuasion. This episode moves quickly: religion, politics, art, immigration, Israel, and the West's crisis of confidence. But the through line is human. It's about what happens when societies replace curiosity with certainty, and when communities replace pluralism with purity tests. It's about the difference between disagreement and excommunication. And it's about why, at a time when so many people feel pushed to declare loyalty before they're allowed to speak, Lionel Shriver insists on something older and harder: thinking in full sentences. I'm David M. Cohn, and this is the J100 podcast. Lionel, thank you so much for being here. It's exciting to meet you all the way in Portugal from here in New York City. You grew up in a religious household, and you later built a career questioning moral certainty. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what parts of your early environment shaped the way you think about right, wrong, responsibility. Like, can you bring us back to kind of those early origins and how they impact the work that you do today?
Well, I should emphasize that I grew up in a liberal Presbyterian household. My father was an ordained Presbyterian minister, but he ended up spending a lot of his time in religious education at the university level, and eventually became president of Union Theological Seminary in New York, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Um, he gets very, or he got, he died a few years ago, but he got very touchy about being described as merely a minister. Um, I was not, I was not oppressed in that cult-like way that, which I actually explored in my last novel, Mania. My protagonist was brought up as a Jehovah's Witness, and that's, extremely oppressive. I wouldn't describe my upbringing as oppressive, but I would describe it as presumptuous, because we kids were told basically that we had to adopt my parents' beliefs. We were not given any theological agency, and I resented that from a very early age. I was also suspicious of dogma and fairy stories, and I by the time I was 12, my father was literally dragging me into the car to go to church by the hair.
Wow.
Um, so I think uh, being raised in a religious household with anti-religious instincts from an early age made me um, suspicious of dogma, resentful of its imposition, and I find that coming back in the woke era of having progressive dogma imposed on us from above. And I've been one of the re- early sources of resistance on this point.
Okay, interesting. It's a really interesting question. I know you speak in one of your well-known novels about parenting and parenting a child who, you know, misbehaves would be a colossal understatement. But in the sense that you're, and just to give you some perspective, I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish home,
Mm,
and I'm actually an ordained Orthodox rabbi, although not a practicing one at the moment, but I did have my own pulpit and different synagogues over the years. And it's interesting to me. I don't know if you're familiar with this concept in Judaism that somebody who is born a Jew can't necessarily, at least from like a doctrinal or like legal perspective, kind of be rid themselves of it.
mm,
They may be rid themselves of the practices, but once they're in, they're in. But let's say you have there's a concept called a baby that converts, like a parent who converts a baby to Judaism from not being Jewish.
mm,
At the age of maturity, the child is actually given the option to opt out, which I find fascinating. There's a certain like freedom that's not given to somebody that's born into the faith, that somebody who kind of had it selected for them can at a certain point when they reach their own age of maturity, they have the option to kind of opt out. It doesn't happen frequently
mhm.
because of the influence of the home. But I'm kind of pushing that back at you in the sense that what do you think is the kind of healthy or idyllic way to raise children, in the sense that in terms of freedom, persuasion, influence, it's complex, no?
Yes, it is. I mean, I wasn't. It's perfect opposite with Judaism and Protestantism because it is a faith. And it doesn't have an ethnic tradition per se. So it is something that you have to voluntarily assume. Uh, though not if you're a child of of a Presbyterian minister. Um, I have to say, I've ended up being perversely grateful that I was raised in a biblical tradition, specifically because I am now familiar with a range of Bible stories and, the names of various apostles and familiar with the Old Testament as well. I'm not well familiar because I resisted it. And I could be extremely well educated given my pedigree, and I'm not. But I'm better educated than most younger people today. And I find that when I make allusions in text to to biblical names or stories that they fall on deaf ears now. I mean, that it's just completely lost. I mean,
Mhm,
if I write, this was his Gethsemane, it's like just a word for most
mhm,
readers now below a certain age.
mhm.
So, I mean, I certainly wasn't grateful for that education at the time. I felt it was being rammed down my throat, but it's a little bit like, lessons in grammar I got in English, which I also resented. I ended up being quite grateful to know, the parts of speech and how a sentence is constructed.
Interesting. Okay, so even though it was rammed down your throat, we'll say like that, it definitely kind of helped form your worldview or your persona as a novelist to be able to kind of push back or to kind of go against the tide or not kind of go with the flow.
Yes, and also, I mean, my moral system uh, is probably still owes a lot of its tenets to Christianity. I mean, I um I grew up within that system, and when I write a column uh, decrying inherited guilt, which has become very popular among progressives, you know that's that's me not wanting to visit the sins of the father on the sons. And where did I get that?
Right. Interesting. Interesting. Why do so many people want to kind of, can you explain, like from your perspective, what is liberalism today, or what is kind of the woke, like what is informing, you explained what's informing your perspectives, what's informing those perspectives?
Well, I think the progressive movement takes on some of the moral judgment of Christianity and the Judeo-Christian tradition. but without the mercy. It's signally unforgiving. In that way, it is anti-Christian.
Hmm.
The persecution of the unbeliever in the progressive world is 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 merciless.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of confusion, a lot like kind of values being thrown around and being implemented kind of in selective ways or kind of inconsistent ways or ways that don't always aren't really rooted in their origin, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yes, I mean, it's become a cliche that the whole woke movement has become a religion, but it's an inconsistent religion, and it doesn't have any it either doesn't have any roots or it has no awareness of its roots, and its texts are embarrassing. Judith Butler, please.
Okay.
She can't write. So, at least the Judeo-Christian tradition is a literary one.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit. We mentioned at the beginning, even before we were on air here, in terms of just the places you've lived, the places you've moved around. I'm curious, kind of both kind of what informed kind of your places of where you resided, United States, UK, Portugal, Lisbon, etc. But maybe even more importantly, what you feel you've kind of gleaned from those environments and what you're observing in the current milieu in terms of who's handling the moment best in terms of the different cultures and the different areas.
Hmm. Well, when I was younger, I really wanted to get out of the United States, and it wasn't just some kind of anti-American thing. It was a taste for adventure, and I had gone to on a couple of trips with my parents that made the rest of the world seem exciting when I was still a minor, and I wanted to explore. So, I mean, one of the first trips I took was to Israel, and I spent 6 months there. In fact, I went back more than once. I did another extended, residence there, during the Iraq War. Um, and that was just I wanted to I wanted to understand it. I wanted to live there. I didn't and none of my explorations have been motivated by, some kind of curiosity about my roots. I mean, I mostly have a German background. I don't know how meaningful that is, and it hasn't filled me with a desire to move to Germany and find out all my distant relatives. Uh, so, you know, I moved to Belfast. Uh, I ended up I planned to stay 9 months and stayed 12 years instead. And
Uh,
that was a that was my real political education. I went through a period of not being especially political at all in my 20s, only keeping patchy connection with the news. I was interested in the arts, I read a lot of novels. I wanted to write novels. I I was interested in stories. Belfast was it definitely politicized me, and it was
mm,
partly because I came in a state of total innocence in relation to the Troubles. I didn't have any opinions. I mean, I'd met somebody who I thought would make a really great character in a novel, and it's not very often that you have the opportunity to go into a situation that is highly politicized in a state of genuine innocence, because, uh, you know, we approach most things with prejudice. Um, and it did not take me very long to develop an intense hostility to the Republican movement there and the IRA, because I felt early on that the the cause did not justify violence. It didn't make any sense. I mean, it was originally, uh, about, discrimination in employment and housing, and that by the time I arrived in 1987, that discrimination had it if anything, shifted in the other direction. that is against Protestants in the establishment's eagerness to assuage the Republican movement. Um, and I this was my first experience of really making up my own mind about something. I might have rejected my parents' Presbyterianism, but I had never rejected the liberal democratic faith that I grew up in. It was a lazy. I just I assumed it in the same way they expected me to assume their religion.
Hmm.
But the religion of the Democratic Party was at least as strong in that household as the Presbyterian Church was. And it was useful to me to form this basically a unionist opinion in Northern Ireland because people like my parents were supporting the IRA. They didn't know what they were talking about. It was kind of lazy, but it was supposedly a liberation movement, and lots of liberal Americans supported the IRA, and that helped break a sense of connection to the standard liberal Democratic Party positions on everything. And I think ever since I have um, picked and chosen about what I think about individual positions rather than just taking wholesale uh, a party position. It made me much less factional.
Like what would call today in America, if there's such a thing, an independent. Like there used to be a thing called an independent politically. I don't know if there is such a thing anymore, but in the sense that if you talk to sophisticated thinkers, and they're honest, they probably will tell you that they would pick, they'd pick and choose different philosophical viewpoints from, let's say, Republicans or Democrats in America, people who are kind of centered in that way. But that's not really so acceptable today, I think. You'd push back on that, which I think, which I admire in the sense that you're saying, yeah, it's not a question of being consistent. It's a question about, which particular issues resonate with you and which don't.
Yeah. And, there are exceptions, but I fancy that that what I think has a certain wholeness, I think it's roughly consistent. But I think it's always important to give yourself the permission to make exceptions to whatever larger uh, moral system you've put together. I mean, for example, uh, I would say that because I'm a pretty libertarian on social issues, I should be permissive about pornography. And I'm very queasy
Yeah.
about about pornography and about how available it is. And I think it's having a terrible effect on younger people's ability to have relationships with each other. So while I haven't really formulated what the answer is, I don't like widespread pornography. So that you can be too consistent and become a prisoner of your own views.
Very interesting. What are the downsides, or what are the challenges of being somebody who kind of fits the description you gave of yourself? What are some of the challenges being in that space?
Well, I think I'm a natural heretic, and I find myself in a position in the arts at odds with everybody else. I mean, that's really what's come to distinguish me as a type. I am one of the only um, non-left wing fiction writers in the United States, and I find that depressing. I it's why are all the novelists, why do they all have the same views? It seems so antithetical to the nature of being A, an artist, and B, a literary writer, you would think that people would, well, classically think outside the box. I mean, that you're supposed to be creative, that you should bring a whole new way of looking at the world to your work and to even to your your life outside the books. And yet there's just this awful conformity. I mean, for example, that there's this awful conformity in relation to the Palestinians and Israel. That's another another example of where I just completely depart company with almost all of my colleagues. And it the way it's played out, I do have colleagues who share a lot of my positions and who have stood up to the worst of progressivism, but they're all nonfiction people.
Mm.
It's not in the arts. The arts have been incredibly homogeneous politically for the last 10, 15 years. And I find that inexplicable. And I
So,
think it's an embarrassment. It's
so
also been a formula for bad art.
I hear it's a difficult position to be in. I hear that. I'm curious, and it's an issue that's deeply impacts and affects, and our readership and our listenership cares a great deal about, which is Israel and the Jewish people. We at the Allgemeiner, we pride ourselves on trying to be accurate and trying to present the facts. But we alluded to it a little earlier, so I'm kind of a like a dual question. One is in terms of bias. You alluded to it, kind of like everybody has a certain bias.
Mhm.
That's something that we struggle with, kind of as a journalist versus a novelist. It's interesting in terms of how bias plays into the roles that we play, or kind of what I'm called bias. It's just we all have natural predilections or assumptions about certain things. How do we kind of self-check ourselves to make sure that we're not uh, falling into the trap of kind of that group think, or what people, often do wrong. And well, let's start with that question. Then I'll ask you the next question, which is I'm very intrigued by why you care so much about Israel. But we'll get to that. But let's just start with bias. How do you how do you tame your own bias? As a novelist,
Well, as a columnist, of course, I play to my biases.
I'm sure you play a different role. That's true. You play different roles.
That's what it's all about. I mean,
Right.
you are naked in your advocacy. That's what a column is. It's trying to make a single point, and you'll ruin a column by doing too much of course,
Equi-
the other side says stuff. I mean,
right.
it ruins its coherence and its persuasiveness. Um, and besides, you've only got 1,000 words. It's just there's not space to
Right.
fight your biases in a very public way.
Right.
So that's all about bias. That's taking advantage of bias. But one of the reasons that I really like exploring issues in novels is that because my artistic instincts are stronger than my political ones, I can't write a book which is just touting one position, like a big column that goes on for 100,000 words. It's just not in me. That's a formula for a bad book. And so in writing my most recent novel, which is out next month in February, um, A Better Life, it's all about immigration. And anyone who reads my nonfiction work knows perfectly well that I'm an immigration restrictionist. And I'm confident that if you read this novel, you'll pick up that the author is an immigration restrictionist. But in order for it to be a good book, not only do you have to have the voice of the other side, the more the merrier open borders crowd, pitching all kinds of, valid arguments, like the we need more labor thing, we have an age structure problem, etc. I mean, there are all kinds of arguments on the other side. It's one of the reasons I like this issue is it's complicated. Um, but on top of that, and this was just, again, artistic instinct, uh, I undermine my restrictionist position by having the whole plot perceived through the eyes of someone who's very suspicious of immigration and resentful, partly because they're dependent, they're taking resources that they don't deserve in a system that they haven't contributed to. Okay, well, he's a 26-year-old kid who's living at home without a job. He's a dependent, and he's a hypocrite. So in making that choice, that's a very good artistic choice. It complicates his whole viewpoint. It undermines it. It means that he's got some kind of cognitive dissonance going on. And I also think that it validates a perception that I have in general, that mooches don't like other mooches.
Mm, mm.
They don't like seeing what they're doing objectified. And they also have a feeling of, yeah, I know what you're about. I'm doing it too. So don't try to put a nice gloss on it. I've got your number. And this structure, it's deep in the book. This structural complication makes it a much better book. And in fact, the ending, which I can't talk about, I never get to talk about my endings, which is a little frustrating. The ending is very morally complex. It's and it's not, it doesn't come across as neatly, oh, immigration is terrible, the author's right. It's not like that at all. And again, it's an artistically excellent ending in my view, but it doesn't necessarily serve my political purposes. And that's because what I want is to write a good novel more than anything, and way more than I want to push any political perspective.
What do you
So
want?
that's how I fight my bias. Is I use a form which naturally militates against bias. If you give in to bias in art, it's going to make bad art, and I'm very aware of that. And that's definitely it's that is especially the case when you're taking on such a polarized issue like immigration.
What inspired you to tackle immigration of all the topics in the world that you could have tackled for this new novel? Why did specifically? And I heard you say why it's so compelling on some level, but I'm curious. Like, I'm sure you weighed other potential um, projects. So why was this in this particular time period so compelling for you?
I've been consumed with immigration for something like 30 years. Part of it is that I've been consumed by the field of demography for even longer. And immigration and demography are like this, right? They're kissing cousins.
Mhm.
And there are personal reasons. I have been an immigrant for most of my adult life. I lived in the UK for 36 years. Um, I'm still an immigrant. I'm now an immigrant in Portugal. Not a very good immigrant, as it turns out, because I still haven't learned Portuguese. So, mea culpa. Um, and, I've always been a legal immigrant. It has involved a lot of trouble. And so, after I've put together all the paperwork and paid all the fees, met all the deadlines, it's annoying that there's so many people who don't do any of that. Um, I've never been dependent on a foreign state. I've, n- um, I've paid foreign taxes. Uh, I'm the model immigrant, except for not learning Portuguese.
We'll
Um,
forgive. We'll forgive.
so, um, and also, I mean, part of the puzzle also is that when I do go back to the US, it's to New York City. And over my adult life, the city has fantastically transformed. And I am between conflicted and annoyed on this point because, strictly speaking, I'm going home, but it doesn't feel like home. And it's basically it's been colonized. I mean, I have to say I was a little horrified to learn uh very recently that there are now 800,000 Muslims in New York City. Um and because I am very concerned with the Jewish community, and there are only something like 900 some thousand Jews, the population of Muslims in New York City, which is the largest concentration of Jews outside of Israel in the world, the Muslim population is soon going to overtake the Jewish population. Now, I know we're supposed to be all multicultural and everything is fine and everyone is the same and there's nothing wrong with any group. But actually, I'm not enthusiastic about this turn of events.
I hear you loud and
And
clear.
and um and all groups are not the same. And I've had the experience of living in London already, which has overwhelmingly been occupied by foreign Muslims, and I'm not too keen about that either. Um, so it starts being personal. I go back to New York. A lot of the people that I'm surrounded by, they're not there illegally. They didn't file a bunch of paperwork and pay a bunch of fees, and a lot of them are dependent on the state. And how can I not feel a little irked?
Here, it's an honest, perspective on it. It's interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, a lot of people, I think, mostly are probably concerned just on the safety front. You're actually talking. There's a certain indignation about kind of just the unfairness of it all. If I'm understanding you correctly.
Yes, and also it's just been allowed to happen. Nobody asked, right?
Right.
And this is the case Western wide. Most native populations of Europe, uh, Australia, United States too, um, they didn't. They've never voted for this, for mass immigration. Even the United States, which is more pro-immigration than most countries, nobody voted for mass immigration. I mean, it's millions and millions of people per year pouring into the U.S. who have no roots in the country. It is not democratic. It is the result of political decisions, but they are not political decisions that have been made with the support of the population.
Interesting. No, I'm just thinking back to thinking about the Jewish community post World War II, and it's one thing sitting here today, established as part of an established community, and like you alluded to the hypocrisy on some level. I'm not comfortable with it, and yet, like, had somebody taken that viewpoint, 80, 80 years ago, etc., when my ancestors were looking for refuge, that would be highly problematic, on some level.
I'm going to interrupt you. I have lots of opinions, little sub-opinions with immigration. And I think it's a big mistake even to talk about immigration as a blob. Like
Okay.
you're either for it or against it.
Okay.
I am enthusiastic about certain groups of people coming into anywhere, right? Any Western country, including the United States. And that would generously include Jews. I mean, I find the Jewish population in the US and in Britain, for that matter, has been overwhelmingly a positive influence. In fact, a disproportionately positive influence. So I think we need to start making distinctions, start discriminating in the old sense of the word, which means having standards. and all groups of immigrants are not the same.
I love that. That is
And
a really perfect formulation. Wow. Yeah.
so, uh, for example, in the UK has let in a large number of Ukrainians. They've given refuge to hundreds of thousands of Hong Kongers. Brilliant, right? They fit in, they work, they're well educated, uh, they don't tend to be dependent on the state, they're culturally compatible. They're from the same larger civilizational background. And, you know, the powers that be on the left don't believe that we should be able to make these statements. I mean, that that this is somehow racist, and we have to consider everyone to being the same. But it's very easy to research. We have a lot of numbers now, especially in Europe, on if nothing else, which nationalities tend to depend on welfare when they immigrate. And I can tell you, it's the Somalis, the Eritreans, um, Albanians. They also have unusually criminal. It's we've got the numbers. It's not hard to do. It's just we don't have the will.
It's really fascinating. Really fascinating. Thank you for sharing these perspectives and insights. So I want to come back to the Israel discussion a little bit, and it's obviously there are parallels and it's related. You spoke about early on in your life visiting Israel. We didn't dig too deeply into kind of what that experience was about, but I would like to hear just why I could push back and say, okay, very nice. Like I love all non-Jewish friends of Israel, really, and supporters of the Jewish people. Hooray, and we'll clap, and we're going to have our big gala in 5 weeks, and we're going to honor President Javier Milei of Argentina for his steadfast support of Israel and the Jewish people and other non-Jews. But at the end of the day, like why do you care? Why is it important? Like why is it something that you're speaking out about? I mean, I wish more people did, but at the same time, I'm always curious, kind of like there's so many issues that you could care more about. Why is this an issue that's so important to you?
Well, I've lived there uh, for long enough that it's real to me, right? Um, which I wouldn't say for most of the people who are trooping around the streets with Palestinian flags. I think most of these people have never been to Israel, and the place is just an abstraction.
I'll just
Or
interject for a second. We talked beforehand about you having an upcoming conversation with Douglas Murray in
yes,
February here, and Douglas also. I've seen him many times debate people at podcasts and shows, and he'll just be like, "Have you ever been there? Have you ever
right.
seen like facts on the ground?" And of course, the answer is no. Right?
Yeah, Douglas is very big on, if you want to write about a place, you want to talk about a place on a podcast, how about actually going there? And he's right. Um so it's a real place. It's an interesting place. It's it's very in your face. The culture is very in your face and sometimes abrasive, which doesn't bother me. I like people who are forthright.
Understatement.
Yes, yes. And a lot of Israelis are obnoxious. And I don't know, I kind of admire that. Um, I do think it's historically important. It's the only Jewish state in the world, um, post World War II that became hugely symbolic. It still is, more than ever, actually, given the kind of increasing anti-Semitism that seems to be spreading all over the globe. By the way, I can't pretend to understand it. I have always found anti-Semitism baffling. I Many a prejudice, I can kind of see where it comes from. I can Okay, fine. I can see what about this group of people might be off-putting. I don't get with the Jews, I don't get it, honestly. I um
Jealousy, no?
Yes, that is part of it. I mean, as I gathered that the group in the world that has the highest IQ is Ashkenazi Jews,
Cool. That's right.
right? And And the accomplishments that have accrued to Jews are extraordinary. And yeah, I think that stirs a certain envy.
Interesting. What's most misunderstood about Israel and the Jewish people?
Well, I think a lot of people don't even understand how small the country is. I mean, it's as if giant Israel is taking over the Middle East. It's this tiny little place. And what is wrong with the people outside of it who hate it so much that they can't give the Jews that little bit of land? Don't tell me that's not just hostility to Jews, because it's asking for so little. And, we were talking about envy. The Middle East is very resentful of Israel because it's so successful. That's one of the things that people who haven't been there don't understand. It is, it's economically thriving. It has successfully integrated its minorities, but not just Israeli Arabs and Druze, but also different Jews from all over the world. Not that they don't have their little problems with each other, but there has been a coming together. It is a successfully patriotic nation in a period that being patriotic has never been less popular. It's got a positive fertility rate, which has become astonishing, and is an expression of belief in the state and in the people. And I think that's what we should envy more than anything. It is that Israelis love their country and love their own people. And it doesn't make that mean that their government doesn't sometimes make mistakes. No government is perfect. But that kind of self-belief has become very, very rare in the West, and it's refreshing. And I think that it also attracts resentment. It's like, what's wrong with you? We walk around feeling terrible about ourselves. How can you be proud? How can you fight for your country? Our kids won't fight for their country if you listen to the polls. And why should they? They're told over and over again that their country is disgusting and their entire civilization is something to be ashamed of. So the Israelis don't have this problem, and I am envious, and 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 I think we should be.
Is that some of the undertone of the MAGA movement, like Make America Great Again, kind of trying to rediscover some of the pride of what America represents or what America could or should be?
I mean, that's one positive aspect of the Trump phenomenon. Uh, he's got a point. I'm not a I've never been a Trump supporter. I always have to clarify that. I wish he weren't president. And one of the reasons I wish he weren't president is that any number of his positions, and that would be one of them, I support, but I never like the way he's doing it. So his language on this point is not going to be very helpful to people like me. It's always put too crudely and has a tendency to backfire. But I do think that we need to restore a sense of pride in the United States. I think the progressive movement has been corrosive, and it's not good life, and it doesn't make a good country to just make to worship hating yourself. I mean, that's perverse.
Well, I mean, just as why don't you live in the United States? Like, what is it connected to some of this discussion or completely irrelevant?
I go back to New York every summer, so I keep a hand in. And therefore, what I like is having more than one world. It's really a kind of greed. So I now have a world in Portugal. I still maintain my ties in London. And so that world is continues to be intact. And then I have my American world in New York. And I just like having a
Diversity.
more input.
Okay. I like that. I like that. I want to pivot a little bit as we kind of wind down. I want to pivot a little bit, if I may, to uh, I know you've written a lot about uh, personal loss, uh, if, even about personal loss, but about loss, about reflections on illness, dignity, limits of empathy. Can you talk a little bit about uh, these very heavy topics, obviously, and they're very personal topics? Death, suffering, moral responsibility. Kind of why do you write about these topics, and what are you trying to accomplish by communicating in a public sphere about these kind of very delicate, sensitive, personal issues?
Well, I've taken on those issues mostly in my novels, and I just ask, what else is there? I mean, um, even if a novel takes on an issue of the day, it has to eventually, to be a successful novel, it has to be taking on an an issue of life, something that is an enduring factor in just being a human being who is born, lives, and dies on this planet. And so, while I don't always know when I start a book where the deeper meanings lie, and that's part of the experience of writing a book, is touching those more profound topics that we all have to deal with, people around us dying, becoming ill. Um, but that's what novels are good for, and that's why people read them. So you may have a superficial story on, going on the top, but it it has to connect with these larger, um, the bigger issues of being alive, and also of being an agent in the world, being someone who can inflict pain. I did, one of the things I took on, one of my least political novels is The Post-Birthday World, which, takes on what we have lots of romantic comedies. I think that the whole concept of a romantic comedy is impossible. There's nothing funny about romance when you're really dealing with love, serious love, and in one side of the book, my protagonist leaves a man who doesn't deserve it. He's done right by her. He loves her. He has supported her, but she's fallen in love with someone else and she leaves him, and it is horrible. And you have to ask yourself, where is that moral? Is that the right thing to do? And if you've ever been in that position, and lots of us have been, you know how deeply it hits, how horrible it is, especially if you're walking out on someone who has has done nothing wrong but love you. That is what they are doing wrong, and that is what they are being punished for. I That is one of the most horrible sensations in the world. And to inflict that kind of pain on someone who doesn't deserve it, well, that's a realm in which we all live in a morally fraught universe. And this is the stuff of novels, and it doesn't have anything to do with the newspaper. But I that's my job.
Okay, fine, very good, thank you. Final two questions. One is, I know your next novel, it's not even on it's not even on the book stands yet. It will be very soon. But what do you, bigger picture? What's next, or not what's next, but like what is something you've always dreamed about writing about but haven't yet, and you hope to maybe get to one day?
The one thing that I've never done, and I don't know whether I'm going to do it in the next one or not, but I've never done a book that that describes someone's whole life. It's a particular form in the novel that that you start in childhood and you take it all the way to death. I think that would be interesting. And because it's a way of looking at a life as a whole. And as I get older, that's a more attractive project because I'm looking more backwards than forwards. And we tell ourselves the story of our own lives, and in the same way that you read a story in a book, you are constantly putting together a version of your story, and it's constantly subject to change. So I think that would be interesting. I like. I wouldn't necessarily want to write about somebody who was famous or did something big. In fact, some of the most interesting books are about what we call ordinary people. And I would find that more interesting. Uh, to make someone's ostensibly ordinary life real and rich.
Is that a genre out there? Is that something that you've seen other novelists do?
Yes, I'm not going to be able to come up with the names of them because I can't remember the
Oh,
names
that's
of
fine.
them.
I'm just curious. But okay, it's not a new thing, but it would obviously be with your own
But
unique.
no, there is plenty of precedent for this form.
Okay. How much of a break? Just as pure curiosity, how much of a break do you take between novels? Like, do you have a certain decompression period, or you're kind of already? I mean, after you obviously have to promote the book and talk about your book, but then like you go jump right into the next one, or like you kind of have like a.
I usually do, but honestly, I haven't this time. I'm conflicted about my next project, so I haven't started it yet, and I decided I will wait until the promotion for the next one is over, and and and
But you don't
by
sit
then
right.
I will be so grateful to just be in my study all by myself rather than blathering on podcasts. Don't take offense,
No, no offense,
and
no offense.
yeah, I will be very very glad to get back to my desk.
Okay, final question for today. I like to ask a lot of my guests this question. I always get fascinating responses. Something about you that most people wouldn't guess. Something about you that you're comfortable sharing that not people who don't know you from Adam. So, but I mean people who read you, who study you, who are fans, who are supporters, like, and who know you pretty well. Is there something you'd be comfortable sharing that maybe they wouldn't guess about you?
Mm. I'm I'm a pretty passionate cook.
Okay.
Um, I try not to spend too much time on it. So there's certain dishes that I won't try because they're too time consuming. But I used to run a catering business. Very
Cool.
few people know that
Okay.
when I
Okay.
was in my 20s. And that's how I earned a living right out of college, doing big dinners for, it was often for uh, the Columbia University area and often to do with university things. But yeah, I I used to cook in vast quantity.
Wow.
I've never worked harder in my life.
So that's the artist in you, I guess, that
Hmm.
expressed itself in
Yeah,
the
staying up till 5 in the morning cutting onions.
in the culinary
That's
arts.
hard work.
The culinary arts. Okay, Lionel, thank you so much for this conversation. It was meaningful, it was informative, it was educational, and I wish you tremendous success with the upcoming novel on immigration.
Well, thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed this conversation.